Coming up, the New York Football Giants get into the building. Sure, they're getting paid for it, but it certainly gives us an opportunity to see Daniel Jones talk to the press. We also get some interesting updates around the top of the draft. More smoke. Is there fire around the New York Football Giants pursuing a quarterback? And yes, of course, the evil empire that is Bill Belichick lurking in the shadows across the entire NFL landscape. We dive in coming up next. Yes, sir. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we are wise, and we are brought to you by Personam, which is an AI-driven cyber threat detection engine. Personam improves your vision into your network security environment and allows you to see cyber threats with tools and platforms just cannot do. Personam is always vigilant, always learning. Check out Personam today. And Andy, what we're checking out today is some New York Football Giants getting in the building. Listen, it's shorts, it's T-shirts, it's jogging around. It's Brian Dable setting the tone of what he wants to see this year for Big Blue. But it's something. It's something ahead of the draft.
I mean, at this point where there's a little bit of a lull, there's a lot of speculation about the draft, not so much about the team. We'll get into the speculation around the draft in a minute, but it is nice to see the players in the building getting together again, just doing some light exercising workouts. And yeah, a lot of them have bonuses tied to some of these voluntary workouts. A guy like Daniel Jones gets a cool $500,000 just being there for these voluntary workouts. I'd say it's worth your time.
Speaking of Daniel Jones, a funny thing happened on the way to the draft. Daniel Jones, hey, he's out there doing some jogging. You got to appreciate that, certainly, coming back off the ACL. But he gets in front of the microphone, and he's never been a particularly comfortable individual in front of cameras, I would say. But this was odd. Daniel Jones looked like a guy that had never had the experience of doing a press conference before. And then we can get into the questions of it all, whatever. But it just the vibes for Daniel Jones right now might be at an all-time low relative to him being healthy, as he allegedly says that he is coming into this season.
He looked like if I gave my 4-year-old son like a large bottle of Mountain Dew Surge and then tried to have him sit there and like pay attention to everything. It was a little odd. And listen, we know from last year, but Daniel Jones is a little bit of a different guy. He goes to a different beat of his own drum.
If it's a drum at all,
as you mentioned, he clearly does not really like being in front of the microphone and answering questions. It must also be hard, Adam, just in general as a professional athlete, especially as a quarterback. Like, they give you the laundry list of all the things that you're not supposed to say, and you have to keep that in the back of your mind, like while you're answering questions. I'm sure there's a million things that these players would want to say, especially like the quarterback and the head coach. It's like, but here are the laundry list of things you can say. One, you can't say anything other than you are healthy. Two, you can't say anything else other than you are excited to get after the next year and you've put everything in the past behind you. But yeah, it did feel odd. Some of the questions were a little odd, but there wasn't really anything too noteworthy other than maybe one or two little nuggets that came out.
You can, yeah. I mean, listen, it is. It's a weird set of circumstances. And also, like, you're not at the point yet where he's throwing the football or not, or you're after the draft and everybody's there and you're getting into pads. Like, when there's real things to ask questions about. Not to knock the reporting pool here, but they also went ahead and asked him, do you think you're the best QB for the New York Football Giants? And listen, I guess you take a shot, right? Because you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Maybe he says, honestly, I don't think so. If it were me, I would find a way to get out of this contract if I were Joe Schoen. I would definitely look to the draft for a better QB option than me. I would definitely give Drew Lock all of the leash in the world to win this job. He said, of course he feels like he is. Like, I don't know what we expect Daniel Jones to say beyond, I'm feeling healthy, the neck, the stinger. He addressed that from last year as well. Like, okay, great. It's just, I will admit it's got to be hard for him when it comes to the idea of, exactly what's being said. The entire conversation is about, what are the Giants going to look like after they get rid of you? Like that's where everything is right now. It's not about, can Daniel Jones turn things around? Could Daniel Jones still be here for the remainder of his contract? That's not even being discussed. It's not even on the table that Daniel Jones could get paid the full $160 million over the life of his contract. So I'm sure it's not an easy one for him to be in there, let alone being in a room with Tommy DeVito, who I'm sure you have a good relationship with, Drew Lock, who's brought there just in case, and then all of the kind of chatter that's building up, as we'll talk about in a minute, the draft.
Yeah, I did find it odd, like, when they ask, "Are you the best person to lead the Giants? Are you the
Yeah.
best quarterback right now?" Like, of course, he's gonna say yes. There were some people that were critical. Dan Schneider, who runs, a really good, Giants account on X, actually challenged him and was like, "Why are we asking these questions? Can we ask what Daniel Jones sees in a cover 2 versus a man-to-man or, like, a press coverage versus like, can we ask him some interesting questions about how he diagnoses defenses?" And surprisingly, like multiple beat writers came back to him and were like, that's such a small, minute amount of people that actually care about that question that we have to ask these overarching general questions that give you no substance whatsoever. And it seems strange because I remember, and some people had pointed this out, like when Mike McDaniel of the Dolphins went over to their game overseas in Europe, there was a really interesting question that one of the writers asked about like the zone scheme blocking that he's used and where
Mhm.
he's taken it from and how they've modified things. And Mike McDaniel's eyes lit up and he was so excited to talk about it and he appreciated the nuanced question that was asked. It would be refreshing for people that care about the Giants that are talking about them all off season. Maybe we throw them a bone during this time period where there's not so much other things going on. Like, don't you think it's okay to ask some deeper questions every now and then? Because you start seeing, they say Daniel Jones can't process things very quickly. Like, well, let's ask him a question about it. How about that? Like, maybe that'll help us inform what Daniel Jones can and can't do.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, so there's two sides to this for me because I've had this with the NBA and covering the Nets as well. Where like at a high level, it's why like when you watch an NBA broadcast or an NFL broadcast, why do they not talk about the cover two schemes and the way that the alignments are working and the different shifts and all everything that's happening over the course of a single play? Because at a high level, it's not terribly interesting or entertaining in the moment, right? In real time. Same thing with the NBA. Listen, just sit there and try to break down what defensive sets they're running and why the blitzing actions worked and what's happening off ball. There's not enough time to send it all out there for the viewer, but also it's a lot of it is see ball, get ball, ball goes in, ball doesn't, pass gets caught or not. Like there is a high level to that. To your point in the off season, and maybe that last thing you mentioned about Daniel Jones, I think that would have been like that would be interesting questions. Maybe not, the idea of the processing power, but like even something simple like what did you feel you struggled with last year pre-injury that was successful the year prior, right? Like where do you think that you can continue to grow as a quarterback? Now, the problem here is, as you mentioned at the top, well, here's all the things you won't say. Here's all the things you don't say. There's also things your agent says. Well, you're not going to say that you feel like you regressed a little bit in terms of your progressions when you're trying to read the defenses. You're not going to say that the neck was just a stinger last year, although I do have real concerns that it could creep up again, right? So, yeah, I don't know why the European version of it works out better. Maybe it's because you're trying to sell the game. So they say, hey, guess what? Break the seal here. If somebody wants to ask you a deep dive question, get into it because we're trying to sell this product over there, as opposed to here where it's oversaturated coverage. So everyone's like, if I only get to ask one or two questions, am I really going to try to get this one in that I know is going to get me back basically a nothing burger in terms of response, or get my sound bites, get my clips so I can make sure I get my articles up, which matters. Like what matters.
It does, but it's like, are you
And it's
excited
also
about the
annoying. Like,
win?
don't get
Are
me
you
wrong.
excited about the win today? It's like, are you just using that as an opening way for the person to just stream of consciousness? Like, it just feels like maybe we could ask some more relevant questions. I pointed out that we're in the off season. It's the dog days of pre-draft between the Super Bowl and the draft. It's like these are the times that you ask people as they're going into it. Obviously, you're not going to ask those pointed questions like when you get into the specifics of a big win. But I think right now it's okay to ask some deeper questions, especially leading up to the draft and the regular season.
And of course, and the last thing I'll say on this, because I do find this kind of stuff fun and interesting, because it's like you like to go watch plays and see how they break down. I also think the timing of this like isn't quite perfect. It's a week away from the draft. You're getting guys into the building. Now, the problem is these guys go away. They go away for the offseason. They're not all sitting around waiting for these questions, but that's where I think you would have better access. It's like if a month ago, right? If pre-combine, you're reaching out to these players and asking, hey, like, do you want to sit down and just kind of look over a handful of plays and just talk about what it is from a QB perspective, from a wide receiver perspective, from an offensive lineman? I bet you would get better access and more interesting conversations. That being said, the other interesting conversation that we'll get into here in a moment is that all these questions about Daniel Jones are directly tied to what this media group, Dan Duggan, Ryan Dunleavy, have been pointing to and now suggesting, Andy, tinfoil hat as you may wear, it is a lot more smoke and potentially fire about the New York Football Giants' intentions at the top of the draft. We will get into that conversation in just one moment. Okay, so as we know, the draft is 1 week away, and the New York Football Giants have big decisions to make at the 6th overall pick. As we dive in on this draft conversation, we let you know this segment's going to be brought to you by Potential, Pietential. Potential is an online wellness assessment tool, free for individual users, sets a baseline, and also provides you with tools to improve and tracks your progress over time. It's great whether you're talking about preparing for the NFL season or just preparing for your work week. Go check it out today at Pietential, potential.com. Andy, top of the draft. We've talked about it. We love wide receivers. We love Rome Odunze. We even love Marvin Harrison Jr., worried to fall. Maybe we put Neighbors as our third favorite wide receiver. But now, Ryan Dunleavy, Dan Duggan, the smoke is building here that the New York Football Giants are definitely having real-world conversations about what it would take to move up the board 2 to 3 spots to land a quarterback. J.J. McCarthy seems to be the name, but if you get 3, then you have to think about being in that third spot. You have to probably think about Drake May.
Yeah, it's interesting. So this kind of came to a head over the last 24-ish hours when Peter Schrager of NFL Network came
Yes,
out
Peter
and
Schrager's
gave
boss.
his.
Yes.
Yeah, he came out. He was the catalyst, but Ryan Dunleavy has been saying he believes all along that the Giants are going to trade up and take a quarterback, trade up to 4 and take a quarterback.
Yeah.
Peter Schrager put out his latest mock draft. Peter Schrager is well regarded around the league. He has good, maybe even a great relationship with Joe Shane, and everyone is saying because he understands, a lot of the GMs, that what he says carries a significant amount of weight. And in his latest mock draft, he has the Giants moving up from the 6th pick to the 4th pick to draft J.J. McCarthy. And the draft compensation the Giants are giving up is pick number 6, pick number 70, and a second-round pick next season to move up those 2 slots to get the quarterback of the future. So initial reaction to all of the media reporters kind of moving things in one direction.
Well, if I was Andy, I would say it's the height of smoke screening right now. We're so close. The closer you get to the draft, the thicker the fog becomes. Things that were being pointed out by Duggan, by Dunleavy, is you don't do this much heavy research into the QB prospects unless you are legitimately trying to go get one. Doesn't mean maybe it'll work out, but that you're trying to go get one. And I thought the great way that they framed this was you're investing hours. You're investing man hours to go see these prospects, to study them, to see them at their workouts and pro days, etc. And you only have so many resources to allocate. So I did think that there's a real world application here where if the Giants, even if they want to send the screens, as you say, and keep some other players available for them, at a certain threshold, you cross over that and you say, well, now you've allocated 40% of your pre-draft workouts and combines and scouting to the QB spot. There's something real here. On a high level of going up and getting a quarterback, I said all along, I philosophically sometimes believe that you're better off building the roster first and then worrying about the quarterback later. However, if you've identified the QB that you believe is the franchise guy, of course, you should be willing to do what's necessary to go get them.
I completely understand. And to your point, and to what everyone else's point is, time invested. The Arizona Cardinals have had a ton of top 30 visits. Not one of them has been a quarterback, right?
Right.
Like
Not wasting our time.
They were like, nope, we're not going to bother. We have other areas of need. We would be silly if we were saying that Kyler Murray isn't our guy when we have said multiple times that he is our guy. Look at the Los Angeles Chargers. They have not brought in any of the QBs for visits at 5. So I can completely appreciate it. But I would say,
and erodes Joe Shane when he says we believe in Daniel Jones, and then is also doing everything he can do to see every quarterback possible, right?
Right. I think you can safely say that the Los Angeles Chargers feel like they have their franchise quarterback for the next decade in Justin Herbert. So,
Right.
there's no real smoke screen that could happen there. Arizona, there's been questions about Kyler Murray, but it feels like if you're going to really put something together, you already have a quarterback that can be a top 12, 13 guy bringing to the playoffs. Feels like that's kind of locked in. For me, what I don't understand, and I just can't get behind it, is why, if these are all people that have close relationships with Joe Shane, why would Joe Shane be putting it out there to let teams know this is potentially the draft compensation that I would give to move up 2 spots, to allow other teams to make a decision to outbid Joe Shane for the guy that he wants? To me, it makes no sense that if this is coming from well-respected, well-regarded people that talk to Giants inside the building, why would you self-destruct yourself and give everyone else your playbook on how to move up?
But okay, so a couple things. One, like this happens every year with every key position, and then these trades sometimes go down, sometimes they don't happen, right? But the compensation gets reported. Why? Because there's already charts that tell you where the value is to move up from 6 to 4, to move up from 11 to 5, whatever the numbers may be, right? So those things are already in place. It's not like you're breaking history here by saying, well, it's going to cost you a 70 this year, a second round this year, and sixth overall to get to 4. Like, okay, well, then look at the chart. That's probably about right. The the part of it where I think I can understand where you're coming from on, well, why would you bother saying this? Maybe you can get up there for cheaper, or maybe it doesn't have to be as big a price point. That could be the case. The other side of it would be, hey, we're willing to give up 670 and a second round pick next year to move up 2 spots to get to this. Maybe that helps scare off some teams that want to come into that. Say you're the Minnesota Vikings and you've been talking about trying to get a quarterback. If you're sitting there and you're saying, well, it was going to be 11, going to be 23, but now Arizona says, well, I've got, 2 seconds and I'm only moving back 2 spots. And we're going to talk about what that means for them in a second. I'm going to need another X from you. Again, this is where I think overall it's funny, because if you're any team that thinks you're going to get your franchise quarterback, it's going to be hard for me to get to a point where I say, oh, that's too much, because I'm getting a franchise quarterback. I'm getting the quarterback for my team for the next 15 plus years. What do I care if I have to sacrifice an extra pick X, Y, or Z?
Yeah,
However, it does add up. Like it does add. It's not like this isn't monopoly money, right? Well, we'll turn around and we'll make some other deals later. It does matter. And I find that part of it kind of fascinating when you talk about the philosophy of NFL teams in general, not just the Giants.
yeah, I agree. Listen, we've said it before. If you truly believe that the next franchise quarterback, the guy that's going to be a top 8 quarterback in the league for a decade plus, is out there, you move heaven and earth to get him. It doesn't matter what you think, what I think. You go with conviction, because if you don't get it right, you're going to be out of the league in 2 years as a coach or a general manager or a scout or whatever it's going to be. What I do see, I believe that
Okay,
if
here we
this
go.
is being out there, that like 670 and a second rounder gets the Giants to move up 2 slots, to
Mhm.
your point, I think it's more likely that it's like the Giants want other teams to already be prepared to give up more draft capital than they normally would be accustomed to move up to 4 or 3 to get JJ McCarthy, knowing that the Giants have other plans that they would prefer
Yeah.
over doing that. Like, that to me seems more realistic. So that's kind of on the media side. Like, why is this out there? What's going on? But let's talk about the actual transaction itself, Adam.
Yeah.
From moving from 6 and giving up 70 and a second rounder to move up to 4 to draft JJ McCarthy. Are you in on this or are you out on this move?
With the understanding that I don't know if as a prospect, if JJ McCarthy is worth X, Y, or Z relative to the way the Giants perceive him, right? We've also seen this. Art Stapleton, I thought, gave a great response to this over on X, where he basically said, listen, we have opinions, media, people watching, fans, and that's fine. But evaluations are what's going on inside NFL buildings, right? So we can try to be as informed as possible, but it really does come down relative to what other teams are able to do, what the teams are able to do. Again, if you believe, if Joe Shane believes in JJ McCarthy, I'm fine with this. I honestly, one of the things that I think I'm most fearful about when moving up to get a quarterback, it's the multiple first round picks year over year. Like, it's, if you were say Minnesota, 11 and 23, well, that's 2 stars. Okay, we get our guy. Or and a first rounder next year. Boy, that's really rich. I, I don't mind 2 second rounders. Like, I really don't. If I want to go get my quarterback, yes. Am I going to now? Sorry, a third rounder and a second rounder. I said that wrong. A third and a second rounder? Third round picks are not guarantees, man. Go through the history of the NFL. It's an opportunity to get a potential starter, but not a guarantee. So this year, I'm sacrificing a contributor to my NFL roster with probably a sub 40% chance of getting a second contract with my team. Probably even lower than that, probably sub 30. And then next year, depending on how I think my team is going to perform, it could be right there at the edge of a first rounder, right? It could be right at the back end of the first round, or somewhere in the probably the top 10 to 15 most reasonably. Okay. Okay, go and look at it. Like, we've seen it, right? Xavier McKinney, he was a top second round pick. We didn't bring him back for various different reasons, cost, etc. Okay, fine, right? Wandale Robinson looks pretty exciting. We think he can build into something, but that's still a question mark. We also took John Michael Schmitz. Big question. You go back and you look at the Giants' track record. It's hit and miss, and that's true of the NFL. So I'm surprised that I don't feel that hesitant to say, okay, third and a second to go get a franchise quarterback. If that we believe is trying to, great, go do it. Fantastic. Like, I really wouldn't have reservations about this, even though I love some prospects at the wide receiver spot at the top.
Imagine there was a case where Joe Shane didn't love JJ McCarthy and still was pushing all his chips in to go
Right.
get JJ McCarthy. Like, I think we all do the caveat, like, well, if they really love him, then yes. It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
well, of course, you wouldn't spend
yeah.
multiple picks
I
to
think
move up
I
and
think it
get.
could be I think it could be a 2 to 3 year start and then probably fizzle out. Let's move
Yeah,
on.
like we don't really know, but like we don't know about Daniel Jones either. So let's just put a bunch of draft capital towards it. Like obviously, they if they move up, they have conviction about whatever selection they're making, right?
Yeah, yes, and here's the other thing too. One thing that this does signal as well, it's weird. If you don't get a quarterback this year, I think the timeline expectations kind of gets this pause put on it for the Giants and for Joe Shane and for Brian Dable. Hey, you bring in pieces, you continue to develop the team overall. If you get JJ, he's still young. There's no pressure for him to immediately start, but the clock does start ticking on, well, now this is your guy. So now this is your franchise, and now you are building it. So I think results will matter more if you draft JJ McCarthy over the course of the season than if you don't take a QB and you just say, well, we're playing out the string with Daniel Jones. Who cares?
Okay, so play this out with me. I want to
Okay.
give you a different perspective on it and tell me if this changes your mind at all.
You got
Let's
it.
say
I'm
that the
here.
Giants ended up the regular season and they were having the record that the Arizona Cardinals did. The Giants are the ones picking fourth, right? Let's say that at the draft point, and then the Giants went and they gave up a bunch of assets to go get Brian Burns, right? They gave up the whole farm of the second and third rounders because they desperately needed an edge rusher.
Mm-hmm.
The Giants are sitting at 4 and they have the opportunity to draft JJ McCarthy. Or they could trade back and get pick 6, pick 70, and a second round pick next year, and they can get their wide receiver one, whether it's Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., or Rome Odunze. If that was the case and the Giants already had that pick and they could make this move, wouldn't you be more like, yeah, the Giants should trade back? They're not one player away, they're not one piece. We're not good enough to give up a third and a second round pick, and we still get one of our top 5 or 6 guys that we have listed on our board. Like to me, I think if you turn it around and say, rather than move up, if the Giants were at 4, would you trade back and take this compensation, moving back 2 spots? I think you'd feel more confident in moving back than you do moving up, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, of course, but yes, like 100%. But the difference there is because of what you have or don't have. Like Arizona has the quarterback in place, so you're moving back and still improving your team, and it's all good. It's all relative. If the Giants right now were in that position, sitting at 4, yes, it would feel good, but you'd still be asking the same question: is there a quarterback that you wanted, and how are you going to go get him? Yeah, great. If flip flop it, the Giants are 4 and Arizona is 6, and we move back 2 spots because they want whatever. Fantastic. We still don't have the quarterback. So relative to like this version of it, you still don't have the quarterback. I always love the trade down. I love a good trade down. Why? Because it means I get to take more players and I get to take more possibilities, right?
Home run swings, right? You
Yeah,
get more swings. And when you mentioned the third rounder not being great, like not necessarily locked in as a starter, but if you get 2 more swings at the second round and the third round to be able to find a bona fide starter for this team, I don't know. I just thought of it like very similar. Like everyone's like, just give up compensation and move up 2 spots. It's like, well, if the Giants were already in the 4th spot and this team in the 6th spot was willing to give up this package for the Giants to move back, I think the Giants would move back in this position. So it's just funny how aggressive people want to be to get JJ McCarthy, which, 2 months ago was not the case.
well, and that's the other part of this too here, because we're going to talk a little bit about why wouldn't we? One of the greatest coaches of all time in the NFL here and how it relates back to the Giants. But we'll extend this a little bit because this is more interesting and impactful in the short term. Um, that the other side of this is like, okay, top 4 QBs, right? And that's what comes down to the evaluation as well. Listen, when you say that, and it's right. A month ago, this guy, is he a first round pick? Like, where is he even going to fall, JJ McCarthy? And then all of a sudden, it was basically consensus. Well, the NFL is telling you media, telling you fans that JJ McCarthy is a better prospect than you guys think he is. Doesn't matter, he didn't throw the football a lot in college at Michigan. Doesn't matter the system, da 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 da. The skill set, the baseline is all there. So you move him up, right? And I'm trying to think about relative to other QB prospects. There's been other years where guys have been around the first round and they've kind of floated. Oh, would he be a top 10? And then he gets taken 15th, right? The Washington Commanders did this, right, when it was in the same draft class with Daniel Jones. You kind of sat there, you get him. Mac Jones, same thing with the Patriots, right? They just kind of sit there and you end up getting the guy when you get him. It's a little bit different with this one because this feels like JJ has now been thrust into the top 4 conversation and he's legitimately there. The caveat being that he is there, but there's still, it seems like, clearly saying, obviously Caleb Williams, but then Drake May, Jaden Daniels. It's still that there is the top 3, and then it is yet definitely JJ McCarthy, but it's a top 3 and then him. So if I was a Giants fan who was skeptical about this, the question I would ask is, are you moving up to get your guy, or are you moving up to get the best guy that you can get? Because everybody else is like, I'm not trading out. You're not getting Drake May out of me. Even the Patriots. Or if I am, it's going to take a lot more than what we're talking about going from 6 to 4.
It would be very similar to like even Brian Thomas Jr., the LSU wide receiver. It's like
Mm.
he
Yeah,
is
that's a
the
good example.
fourth
Yeah.
ranked wide receiver, right? And it feels like throughout this entire process, there has been 3 wide receivers that you feel like are going to go in the top 10, right?
Yep.
And it feels very similar in the quarterback spot. If all of a sudden teams were like, we're going to trade up to the 5th spot to get Brian Thomas Jr. and give up a 3rd rounder and a 2nd rounder or a 1st rounder next year to get him. You'd be like, what happened? Like, what has changed from the end of the season where he was like a late 1st round guy to people now being top 5 to people spending additional draft capital to go up and get him? Like
Right.
the surge of people and interest in JJ McCarthy feels disproportionate to like what everyone has been talking about all season long with him. Like you didn't hear scouts. I didn't hear any NFL scouts in the middle of the season, towards the end of the season, saying he's like a top 5 pick, he's a top 10 pick. But now all of a sudden there's this like group thing that's kind of going on that should he be a 1st round pick? Is 6 too high for the Giants to take JJ McCarthy? Now it's like, well, clearly at 4, we push all our chips in to get JJ McCarthy. And now it's going to be like, well, JJ McCarthy might go number 2 to the Commanders. We got to avoid that at all costs. The Giants should give up 5 1st round picks to get the 2nd spot to be able to draft JJ McCarthy. It's like, at what point have we jumped the shark at him?
And,
Like,
that's what I think is Yeah, that's like, it is fascinating about it, right? Because we're having the conversation. Okay, it's from 6 to 4. It's JJ McCarthy. Da da da. And then all of a sudden you say, well, the Commanders maybe are interested at 2, and you go. So then we wouldn't have this conversation now. You wouldn't even hear the rumblings that the Giants really want to go up to get JJ McCarthy because they believe in him, and they wouldn't send out those vibes, mostly because he'd be like, well, you can't get there. Like you don't have enough to get there. It's not going to happen for you. Or because once you get to the top 2 spots, it does feel sometimes like, well, are those teams willing to come out of those positions? It's why we don't talk about 1. It's why we don't talk about 2, right? Because these teams feel locked in. It's just about who are they going to take. Even 3 with the Patriots. It's the first time in this draft where you say, okay, maybe someone could offer them something that would shake it out. Before we talk Bill here real quick, I did do this in the background, as you know I like to do. So it's hard to get this happening in real time, and that's how I was doing this. But I just had the Giants take J.J. McCarthy at the 6th overall pick, and I act like I traded away my 70th in order to get him, right? So J.J. McCarthy at 6. This is the picture that I would paint if you're a Giants fan and whether or not you believe in J.J. or otherwise. They take J.J. McCarthy at the top of the draft. At 47, I have them taking Trey Benson, the running back. Let's get the weapon in the backfield, highly regarded, been tied to the Giants. Then when it comes to 107, I take DJ James. We talked about that cornerback prospect coming out. Obviously, someone you think you can plug in there, maybe be a potential starter across from Deonte Banks. And then this is where the Cortland Sutton, which Andy brought up, full credit to him. He pointed him out as being a viable trade target, wouldn't cost a lot of draft capital. That's where maybe you go get a wide receiver like that. And this would be, I think, painful for you and me, painful for the Giants fan base to sit here and say, oh, we're going to push pause on getting the true elite number 1 wide receiver. But you can't do it all, right? You can't have it all. You want the QB. It obviously means that you're sacrificing getting one of those top 3 wide receiver prospects. And if you listen to Mel Kiper, he still believes in Daniel Jones. He says, go get that wide receiver. So we know it's still going to play itself out. It'd be interesting, I think, if these narratives shifted all between now and the start of the draft a week from now. Is this just the last fire of coverage to get a few more clicks out there? We'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, that's the noteworthy piece. If the Giants go with JJ McCarthy at 6 or 4 or whatever we end up deciding here, you have to figure out how to get a viable wide receiver a different way. And that's what we highlighted, either free agency or trade, because we don't know if there's a guy in the 3rd or 4th round that really is going to make the impact that the Giants need this year.
Of course. And then the other positions of need, right? Cornerback, et cetera. Everything is going to take a hit here for the New York Football Giants. Last note, if we could, coming back in just one moment on Bill Belichick. Okay, so as only the case could be, the draft is approaching, and there is a head coach, maybe the all-time greatest head coach in NFL history, sitting on the sidelines doing absolutely nothing, and that's old Billy Boy. When we talk about him, just as the footnote, do we think that all of this rumblings now that he would like to coach the Giants, that he'd like to maybe coach the Cowboys, that he'd like to maybe coach the Eagles, that all of the perfect time to put it out there right before your franchise goes to make potentially future altering decisions in the draft, just as a reminder, here's this guy lurking over your shoulder. And as if to counterbalance that, you also get reports out of Atlanta about conversations that were had between owners suggesting that you should not trust Bill coming in the door, though those were denied by Kraft in New England.
Yeah, I mean, the reports came out that he wasn't even top 3 in the Falcons list, and he was shocked that he didn't get the job, and that the rumor and report to your point is that Robert Kraft called Arthur Blank, the owner of the Atlanta Falcons, and said, "Whatever you're hearing from Bill, don't believe it. He's not the guy that you want here," which is fascinating if it actually happened. Obviously, everyone's denying that happened, but it comes out that Bill Belichick says if he is going to coach again, reportedly, he would like to maybe join the NFC East. And he looks at the Giants, the Eagles, and the Cowboys as his 3 potential destinations. I find it weird that he didn't do the Washington Commanders, but maybe it's only because they just hired their new head coach. And he's like, yeah, that's not really viable. But the Cowboys could move on from Mike McCarthy if they have a bad year. The Eagles could definitely move on from Nick Sirianni if they end up faltering this year. And we know that if the Giants don't get it right, Brian Daboll and co will be on the hot seat. Adam, easy question.
Yeah.
Should the Giants be interested in Bill Belichick if the season goes awry?
Oh, if the season goes awry, I think you should be interested in anybody and everybody, right? Everything should be viable. I think that's a big commitment, obviously, the control that he's going to want to reshape things. I think that if this season went awry, though, we talked about this the other day, over 6.5 over under win total. If this season goes awry, you know that John Mara is going to be looking probably for a safety net, stability, someone he thinks he can trust. So should you consider one of the all-time greatest coaches in the history of the game? Of course you should. But I think the number one voting interest for the Giants fans be that this season looks like it's the progressive step forward, because I do like Joe Schoen as the GM. I do like Brian Daboll as the head coach, and I'd rather it just be a building block here, because it doesn't really matter. Name any coach you want in the league that's available. If this season goes off the rails, we're right back to square one, let alone, by the way, if the Giants draft a quarterback at the top of this draft class and then the season still goes off the rails.
Well, listen, Andy Reid is considered one of the greatest coaches that is out there. And everyone's trying to figure out, like, how long is his runway? He's 66 years old. Bill Belichick, happy birthday. Shout out Bill Belichick.
Billy Boy.
Avid listener of OGP. He just yesterday turned 72 years old. It's like, okay, so if we're talking about next season, he'll be 73 years old. And we're talking about, like, what is the runway to develop and build a franchise, especially if you're drafting a young quarterback? Like, what is the runway for Bill Belichick? It would be, we think we have a team that can compete, and our window is the next 24 months, 36 months. We think a 2-year window to be able to compete, and Bill Belichick gives us that. For me, it just feels like that ship has sailed, especially for the Giants. A lot of sources inside the NFL are saying they would be surprised if Bill Belichick ever gets a head coaching job ever again, just because of his age, his gravitas, like what it would mean and the runway that it presents. I would prefer the Giants, if things don't work out and they decide to move on from Daboll, to go young and think about doing a full reset of this roster rather than trying to hold on and piecemeal something and say we could win in the next year and a half.
Yeah, at the end of the day, as Andy would like to say, listen, hopefully this is a non-story when it comes to the New York Football Giants. Hopefully it's everybody else talking about would they or wouldn't they. I'll tell you this right now. If the season went off the rails and Bill Belichick came in for an interview with the New York Football Giants, I think we'd be hard-pressed to find that John Mara let him walk out the doors. It's like if once you're there, I think it'd be hard to undo it. That being the case, though, we've got the draft coming up in a week. We're going to have, you can check it out over on our YouTube channel. We did a one on Jaden Hicks, who, by the way, yes, did come in for a visit as reported by Dan Duggan. The Cortland Sutton piece, which Andy came onto for himself, also started to get traction on the back end. We've been on the front foot about a couple of interesting narratives. So we're going to have some other player profiles up over there over the next week. And we're going to continue to point out the different options of how the Giants can still be successful, regardless of the decisions that they make in the draft a week from now. In the meantime, YouTube at One Giant Podcast, over on X at One Giant Podcast. You can get it at AMAC214 at Adam Armbrecht. And of course, wherever you get those podcast needs fulfilled. Man, I cannot wait, dude. We are counting down the days. But until next time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.